I'll go ahead and give the floor to Claire for her special presentation on student fee boards. Claire, and then you should be able to share screen. I will stop sharing.
Yeah, perfect. Can everyone hear me all right? Ken, can you hear me all right?
I can hear you good on Zoom.
Okay, great. Thanks. Okay, so today I'm going to be presenting in my role as the chair of the Student Fee Board. I thought I would start with a brief overview of what the Student Fee Board does and what we fund. Partially because graduate students, a lot of us, the fee is paid for by our assistantship, so we might not know exactly what it is or how much it is or what it is used to pay for. And even all students that pay the fee might not necessarily know what it's used for. So I thought I'd go over a little bit of our structure, and then I want to introduce 6 different facilities projects that we're considering funding for this upcoming year. We're actually, these facilities are over $500 million in projects, so this will take decades to fund completely, but I'd like to hear your feedback on some of the projects that we're considering. So yeah, I'd like to go over a little bit of the history and background, membership, our mission statement, and the funding process within the fee board. So the student activity fee first existed as a separate item in 1996, and a separate facilities fee was started in 2008. Around 2016, they started talking about unifying the fee structure and also getting student input into the student fee process. And the student initiated fee was first started in 2017 and 2018, with it being a complete separate fee in 2019-20, because the technology fee is now a part of tuition. So now you only pay tuition and the student initiated fee. There are no other fees in the process. So this sort of is a very recent process, so it's very exciting because it's constantly changing at this point, and we're still sort of developing best practices, but this is the sort of idea on the history behind how the fee board was created. So what is the student fee? Obviously, students most of the time focus on the per student dollar rate, which is around $265. But actually, when units come to the fee board, they don't request a per student rate. They just request an overall budget. But a rough estimate is that roughly a $1 increase in the fee will generate approximately $80,000. And that's purely a function of our large enrollment at Penn State with both undergraduate and graduate students, as well as summer enrollment, where we also charge a partial fee. So after the total dollar amount from all the budgets and all the offices is determined, then the per student rate is determined. And you can see this is our allocations from the last 2 years. The fee has stayed flat at $265. Most of it has gone for facilities projects, which is in this dark blue, followed closely by campus recreation. And we fund a lot of student employees at campus recreation, so that's why that is so big. And then activities, the largest part of activities is in which is the University Park Allocations Committee. After that, we have services. These are things like counseling and psychological services, and other offices on campus, like the Paul Robeson Cultural Center, the Center for Sexual and Gender Diversity, and others. And then the smallest category is student government. So actually the funds that GPSA uses, as well as the other student governments, CSGSG and UPUA, comes from the student fee board. So that's our smallest category of funding by far, but it is still an important part of how the student fee is spent. We have this very, very small amount at the very top in case enrollment dips down lower than what we were anticipating to be able to completely fund the offices. So I talked a little bit about this, but basically the student fee funds 4 categories: activities, facilities, services, and recreation. We have this new funded by your student fee stamp that you should look out for on the materials of all the offices we fund. I've given a couple of examples like CAPS, but another couple of offices are the student farm, A lot of different student activities are funded by us, like Homecoming and the Student Programming Association, as well as student orientation transition programs and several other offices. So for our membership, we have 12 voting members. The UPUA and the GPSA president are automatically members. The UPUA student government has 3 student appointees. GPSA has 2 student appointees, and then the GPSA and UPUA presidents collaborate to appoint 5 at-large members who preferably are not involved with student government. We also have a couple non-voting members, including an at-large delegate or an at-large alternate, and the UPAC chair and a director of communications that's appointed usually by the student fee board chair. I thought I would share our mission statement just so you can see a little bit about our goal of what we do, and I'm just going to read it. The student fee board aims to improve and enhance out-of-class experiences in the categories of facilities, recreation, services, and activities. The student fee board serves and represents all students through a participatory, transparent, and equitable decision-making process in recommending the distribution of the student-initiated fee. I will say this is our, although it's our mission statement and we do have a separate vision statement, this is very much a vision. We're still working on making our process participatory, transparent, and equitable in many other ways. So if you have feedback on our process, I'm sure some of you are just hearing about the student fee for the first time tonight. We are always looking for feedback on our process. But in case you're curious about our process and what it looks like, in April and May, after the student government elections, the members are selected and then the chair is elected out of all the members of the student fee board. In the summer and the fall, usually we have training and internal development. In this fall, we're working on facilities projects, which I'll talk more about in just a second. And then in November through February, we have hearings of all the different offices that we fund, where basically all the offices come in and give a brief presentation on their requests for funding in the coming year. Usually they'll request either an increase or flat funding, and occasionally offices will request a decrease if they're not fully utilizing funding. In late February and March, we will deliberate on all of the hearings and any new funding proposals, and then at the end of March, usually we recommend our formal funding recommendation to the Vice President for Student Affairs and the President, which then goes on to the Board of Trustees. Just a note, just like GPSA meetings, we have public comment during every meeting. So if you're interested, you can email us for the Zoom information. We are meeting in person, but I do have a Zoom connection set up for every meeting. We meet at 8 a.m. on Fridays, which is not the best meeting time, but it's the only time that could work for all the fee board members. But we also post our agendas on social media. We're on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and I would encourage you to follow along to see how the fee that either you or your assistantship is paying is used. So that's a little bit about our fee process. I'm just going to hold questions until the end so I can get through all of the material. But I just want to talk really quickly about the 6 projects that we're considering in case you want to voice your opinion on what you think is the most important. So the first one, just as an overview, there are 6 different projects that we're considering. 4 of them are pictured here. We have Fisher Hall up near East Halls, a new natatorium, which is at the site of the current outdoor pool. We have a WellBeing Building, which would be right next to the hub parking deck, and then a hub expansion. So the hub expansion is actually the section that's right by Pollock Road that's currently 1 floor, and it would be expanded, I think, for it would be a total of either 5 or 6 floors. The 2 projects that aren't pictured here, one of them is technically pictured here. They want to redo the 3rd floor of the hub to create affinity group space. And then the one that's not on this map, because it'd be a much different map, is they'd like to expand Stone Valley, the recreation center that's about 15 minutes from campus. So the Hub Robeson Center Edition, you can see it pictured here. Basically, this is just a 1-floor story right now. But they want to add a ballroom, different office space, affinity group space for cultural organizations, multicultural student organizations, and other broad student organization space. They want to add different lobby and flex areas, as well as student-facing offices. And on the very bottom floor, they would also expand the university dining options on the 1st floor. and you can see it's replacing this first floor area in the hub. This is a more detailed breakdown. So again, on the top floor, they would have a ballroom that could support about 1,000 people. On the third floor, they would have student affairs, administrative office space, and then affinity group space and student organization space on the second and first level, and then expanding dining options on the ground floor. So the second project is the WellBeing Building, which would incorporate a lot of new offices, or not new offices. Basically, the goal of the WellBeing Building is to get all of these offices, which are spread across campus right now, into the same space. So they're consolidated in one space. The offices include campus rec, health promotion and wellness, CAPS, student care and advocacy, and others. And the idea is to take down the 1960s version of the white building, which is currently located where this image is, and move all of the athletic capacity to this part of the white building. And then they would build this new WellBeing Building here, right next to the hub parking deck. So that's the second project. This is some ideas on what it might look like. And then the third project is the new Natatorium. So basically, the current Natatorium, which is located right here, is falling apart. I've heard stories of it literally leaking into the ground. I think the new Natatorium has strong benefits for both athletics, where they're able to recruit and hold different tournaments for the swimming team here, but also it has the capacity to increase recreational swimming. Right now, there are times when the Natatorium has to close to students because they just don't have the capacity to have both the athletes and students in the Natatorium at the same time. And this new Natatorium, which you can see would take up more space than the current one, you'd have all hours, all operating hours, you'd have a recreational pool. This is the Stone Valley Master Plan. There are 5 different parts of this project. The first is a recreation area in the southern part, where they're proposing to have a beach and some volleyball courts put in. If you've ever been to Stone Valley, there's already some facilities there, but they're planning to expand it, especially with the beach and volleyball courts. They're also planning a leadership retreat center where they're hoping to have overnight facilities so that student leaders don't have to book places far away from campus. They have a vertical adventure area and a well-being center, and they'd also expand the lake loop trail that goes all the way around the lake. The next project is the Hub Affinity Group Space project. Basically, yeah, this would affect affinity-based groups, discussing cultural and identity-based student organization with shared cultural, religious, racial, and personal identities. And these are all the organizations that have been collaborated with so far. We've received feedback that there aren't, I don't think, any religious organizations on this list, so hopefully they will incorporate that in the future. But this space would basically increase the capacity of these student organizations to hold shared community space in the hub. It is not next to the PRCC. It is not a direct PRCC expansion, but the idea is to give more community space to students in the hub, to affinity-based groups in the hub. Okay, and the last one is Fisher Hall. So they're planning on basically moving some non-student facing offices like the student orientation and transition programs and the parents program into a renovated Fisher Hall, and undergraduate education would also be hosted there. We've noted that this project primarily affects undergraduate students, so undergraduate education would provide some of the funding for this project, but there are other offices like the Office for Sexual Misconduct Prevention and Response that would be moved to this building that we're considering. So in terms of the timeline, all of these, most of these are very far out. They could be 6 to 10 plus years, except for the affinity group space and the Fisher Hall. Both of those could happen relatively soon because they're smaller projects. The idea is that these are in total over $500 million worth of projects. So these are huge projects. You can think of the annual allocation towards facilities as being around $10 million. So it's really, it would take decades to fund under our current fee structure. So I'm hoping to get a little bit of feedback from you all on some projects that caught your eye, hopefully a little bit during the meeting, but I know we're short on time. So if you want to send me a chat on Slack or in the Zoom chat, any feedback is helpful, but I am hoping to get a little bit of feedback before we move on in the agenda. But that's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire, for that presentation. Do we have questions for Claire?
Hi, Claire, can you hear me?
A little. It's kind of soft, but yeah, go ahead.
I'll repeat if you can hear. I'll repeat. What did you say?
Okay, so thanks for the presentation. I was wondering if in the offices that request fund for the student fee board, is CAPS included in that?
So is CAPS included in the offices that come to the student board? Is that the question?
Yeah, so
is
have you
CAPS
already
included?
heard from the officers who request funds from the student fee board?
Yes, CAPS does request funds from the student fee board. We don't fully fund CAPS. They have an operational budget from the university, but we do partially fund CAPS.
I was just wondering if any current like CAPS and other well-being institutions which cater to students' mental well-being, have they requested any funds from student fee board, and what are you planning to fund them in any way?
So I got the second part of the question. Are we planning to fund them in any way? But I didn't catch who you're like. Not CAPS, a different organization.
Yeah, the officers which cater to mental well-being for students.
Sorry,
I didn't.
did you hear the answer to the first part? Sorry, so Claire said that CAPS is partially funded through the student fee.
I did hear that. I just wanted to know if they're requesting any additional funds.
So they, it's up to the office to decide if they want to request an increase or not. CAPS has only been requesting general salary increases, raises basically for the last couple of years. They definitely have the option to request increases, but they have not been doing that. So I think that's partially due to space limitations, which is why one of the considerations that we're doing for facilities is the well-being building so that they can have more space on campus. But they have not been requesting increases lately.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
All right. All right, Claire, could you just talk a little bit about, because I think it was really helpful when we had the focus groups, just give a little feedback to like what they mentioned, if you don't mind.
You said some of the summary feedback from the focus groups?
Yes, could you talk a little bit about the feedback that you got from the focus group?
Yeah. So I think the projects in the focus groups, we mostly focus on projects that would meet unmet needs and what they thought would be the most important, both in terms of timeline and in terms of meeting unmet needs and in terms of utilization. And I think hands down, folks thought that the project that would be the most utilized is the hub expansion, where a lot of undergraduate students especially are in the hub every day. So they definitely thought that would be the most utilized. In terms of meeting unmet needs, I think the one that was most enthusiastic was the well-being building, with broad concerns about some of the other projects. Stone Valley, people are concerned about potential lack of transportation or accessibility out there. They think funding projects closer to campus is a bigger concern. With the Natatorium, there's a strong extra possibility for athletics to contribute funding that doesn't exist with other projects. And then with, let's see, Fisher Hall, again, it's sort of a smaller scale project that primarily not only benefits undergraduate students, but mostly even first year students. So it doesn't have really a super strong contribution to all students, and that's a concern there. And then with the affinity group space, I think there has been a lot of broad support for the affinity group space, with the only asterisk being that there is some overlap because affinity group space is already planned for the hub expansion. So having the affinity group space built on the 3rd floor and then moving them a few years later down to the hub expansion. We've had some dialogue about that in the focus group meetings and in the fee board meetings, but overall, I think there is definitely broad support from the focus groups for those affinity group spaces as well. But yeah, that's sort of a summary of the focus groups so far.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Maybe if I could just ask folks to put in the chat, like the project that stood out the most to them. We usually do a survey that has like formal rankings, but if folks could just put in the chat the 1 or 2 projects that stood out the most, that is just a helpful way to collect some feedback, especially from graduate professional students who we don't often hear from.
All righty. Well, thank you, Claire, for that. All right. And now we'll go ahead and move on